Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our third workshop out of 3 for the draft extended day-ahead market tariff revisions. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined by John Anders from our legal team, as well as some other folks from the ISO EDAM legal team, as well as the EDAM policy team. So before we get started, just a couple reminders. The call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only. So any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And then if you need technical assistance at any point during today's meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer. Our event producer today is Silas. And then we will be taking questions and comments throughout the call today. So if you connected to audio through the WebEx using that call me option, you can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, which is located just at the bottom of your screen. But if you connected to audio outside of the WebEx and just dialed in, you'll need to press #2 to raise your hand. So we'll be keeping an eye on the hands and pausing when appropriate. And just a reminder to everyone to please state your name and affiliation before making your comment or asking your question so that we know who is speaking. And then you can also send your question or comment through the chat to all panelists, or you can send it to me. Again, my name is Isabella Nicosia. So we'll be keeping an eye out for those as well and read them out to the team. So the agenda for today, we'll get started here in just a moment, and I'll hand it over to John for some opening remarks. And then we'll dive into the continuation of reviewing the draft tariff revisions for section 33.11. I believe we left off at the day-ahead market enhancements settlement section on Friday. So we'll kick things off with that and then move into the section 11 revisions. And then we should have time for a 10-minute break before finishing things up with the appendices. So appendices A, B, and F, and section 27. And then we'll leave some time at the end for next steps and closing remarks and any last questions you may have. So with that, I will hand it over to John and we'll get things started.
Thanks, Isabella. And thank you everyone for joining us for the third workshop. I really appreciate you sticking with us and submitting all your initial comments to get things going here. And for your participation and engagement in these workshops. This will really help both the ISO and hopefully the stakeholders. Certainly for us, we're in publishing the next version of the draft tariff, and then hopefully for all of you in reviewing that next version of the tariff. Having gotten sort of a little deeper dive and a bit of a cold look at lots of material that we published on the draft tariff. So, there's a number of us. We have our SMEs. Please engage with us, raise questions, comments, concerns. We'll answer them as we go. And I think we're making good progress. So it does look like we're going to complete all of the material review, certainly today. Perhaps a bit early, but I'm not going to guarantee that, but hopefully so, given the late afternoon hours that we'll be in by that time. And with that, I guess I'm going to turn it back over. We're going to start with section 33.11.3. So our day-ahead market settlements for the extended day-ahead market, and then we'll switch to section 11 and some of the changes we made there for the settlement of some of the real-time congestion offsets and all the rest of it. Okay, David, I think you're up, and we're all here to support you, so anything, just direct us as we go. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just, there we go. I will be sharing the document. Hopefully it is popping up, and then just real briefly, could someone confirm they can see the document and they can hear me? And if so, we'll get rolling.
Yep, everything looks great.
Thumbs up? Okay, great. So last week, we handled some of the day-ahead market section of section 33, which is, I think it was 33.31. And so a lot of the comments here and the sort of feedback I have in relation to the comments we received really mirror what happened there. So we're talking about the day-ahead market settlement. So it's the standalone settlement provisions for the day-ahead market. So it's a lot of the comments were similar and the responses are similar. So maybe you'll have a little bit of a feeling of deja vu, and if so, that's fine. That's what I feel too. So first question, there was a number of questions just here, these specific cross-references you see about settling imbalanced reserves. People were saying, hey, you're referencing tariff sections that don't exist. What's going on with that? And again, those are the cross-references to the forthcoming day-ahead market enhancement sections, and those will be the section numbers where we talk about settling imbalanced reserve awards to resources. So again, as we said last week, just hang tight, and we appreciate your patience. But you know, the sections on how a resource gets paid for providing imbalanced reserves awards will be basically identical for ISO internal resources versus an EDAM resource. So you know, the same rules will basically apply, and you'll be seeing those soon. Okay, moving on then, I think in 33.11.3.3, similar sort of questions, same answer, you know, the cross-reference to forthcoming draft tariff. Okay, let's keep scrolling, and okay, then here's some more, I'd say, substantive questions on the greenhouse gas accounting in IFM. Pacific Corp had a specific question or comment that it's not clear if the GHG payment distinguishes among various GHG regulation areas. And the answer here is that settlements BPM will have separate charge codes for the Washington GHG payments. And we've made a couple small tweaks to the language to sort of accommodate that. And then there was a second comment or question in this section, Pacific Corp again, asking for an example of how the cost of GHG compliance will be embedded in the LMP. And we have an answer sort of here. You could see on the side, a resource may submit a GHG bid out or serve demand in another GHG regulation area, but the cost in its native area will be covered within the LMP and not a separate GHG payment. So, you know, with that, I'll pause for a moment. If there are any questions on the GHG questions, and Andrew Ulmer might be able to provide more detail if you have more, you know, additional questions on that GHG area.
David, this is James Lynn, principal at so I just wanted to add a clarification. We're not going to have a separate charge code distinguishing Washington greenhouse gas payment from California greenhouse gas payment, but we will have a separate day ahead greenhouse gas payment from real-time greenhouse gas payment.
I see. Okay, so if the it'll be accounted for in that way. So the ultimate treatment would be kind of in line with what I said, but it would just be a little, mechanics would be a little bit different.
Yeah, within those two charge codes, they'll be able to distinguish between Washington greenhouse gas payments versus California, but we are going to have the charge codes by market and not by greenhouse gas region.
Okay, well, that's a good detail to keep in mind for those who are particularly interested in the GHG tracking and the costs and so on. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll continue on. Of course, if you do have a question that comes up in a minute here, you can feel free to raise your hand and we'll go back to it. Then on the neutrality statement, you know, section 33.11.3.9 deals with neutrality. The introductory statement kind of saying we will consider each component of the LMP to ensure neutrality, and then we added some incremental changes within a balancing authority and across GHG regulation areas. There's a clarification we added in response to a comment or question from Pattern Energy seeking clarification on the offset calculated at a BAA versus P node level. So hopefully that additional language addresses the question there. Another question related to GHG costs and settlements, Pacific Corp asking if the allocation will be direct to demand or through the EDAM entity. It will be directly, the offset amount will go directly to scheduling coordinators for LSCs within the respective GHG regulation areas. And I think that was it in terms of the comments submitted on 33.11.3, which was, again, day-ahead market settlements in EDAM. And then I'll pause here for just a moment. And if there's no further questions, then we'll go into real-time market settlement in the EDAM. Okay, hearing none, I'll move on. And again, if a question comes to you later, feel free to queue up, raise your hand, whatnot. All right, on the FMM imbalance energy settlement, Pattern Energy was requesting more detail on, the mechanics of dynamic and pseudotide resources and how they'll be handled in the EDAM area. And I think maybe a good clarification to add is dynamic scheduling. Here we have in the note, dynamic scheduling between different EDAM balancing areas is not supported. And a mirror resource between an EDAM area and a non-EDAM area would be required to make sure everything gets reflected and accounted for properly. And so pseudo ties, if there's a question there, those are, as a reminder, are modeled as an internal resource within the BAA into which it is pseudo tied, and that's not part of the Haas reversal rules and all that. So that wouldn't be, I guess, relevant to any questions about how this relates back to the Haas reversal rule that's referenced in section 11.32. Okay, I'll keep going, and you'll see in 33. Oh, sorry, I already made it past the real-time market section. So, yeah, just a few brief comments there, and then I'll stop there. And I think, John, was that it? And I guess, do I get to hand it back over to you for the main part of section 11?
Yeah, why don't we just go through the rest of these 3311 sections? You can keep driving along,
yeah.
And then, but I'd like to just make sure we don't have any questions on any of either the implementation fee, so that's here in section 3311.5, and then the next are the administrative charges, and in, I think, section 3311.6, so you can
Fair enough.
go ahead and
yeah, I'll just keep going to the balance of 33.11, and then if there's something I don't particularly know much about, I'm sure one of my colleagues on the call can jump in and help flesh out the explanation. So I guess, yeah, we'll just follow through the rest of 3311 and then move on to main bit of 11. So continuing on, 33.11.5, as you see here, covers the implementation fee. It doesn't look like we really had any questions or comments on that language. So, it basically will cover the implementation fee and specifies sort of how all the costs will be accounted for, et cetera. Then moving on, 33.11.6, the administrative charge. So implementation fee applies, things are implemented, then you're up and running. The administrative charge for ongoing participation. So, and then here, I think it was just I think in the sentence I have highlighted here, I think it was just a typo, or not really a typo, but the point that the sentence saying, yeah, the way I think that the additional thing that you see struck in red was trying to add more detail, and I think it inadvertently might have made the sentence more confusing. But I think the point, with the deletion, I think the point is even more clear. If you're an EDAM entity, you don't also get charged the EIM administrative charge. If you're a EIM only entity, there's an EIM charge. If you're EDAM participant, there's a EDAM charge. And I think the point of that sentence should be clearer now. Okay. Then 33.11.7, the ISO will allocate to the EDM entity and EDM LSEs the EDM access charge. And then a sentence saying here that we, the ISO, will continue to charge per the provisions of Section 26. I think by its term, Section 26 applies to the CAISO control grid and not to EDM areas. And I think looks like Idaho Power was hoping to just have further clarity just to make that 100% clear, and that's fine. So yeah, you see a sentence added, we will charge market participants transmission service on the CAISO control grid according to Section 26. So just so within the body of 33, that's clear there, instead of, you know, have folks having to sort of go back to Section 26 to confirm that yes, that's a CAISO control grid set of provisions in 26. And then so just briefly, 33.11.8 is talking about the flexible ramping products. That's a real-time market issue, and we will allocate and settle payments and charges for the flexible ramping product according to Section 11.25. So that's all, you know, an existing provision. It's sort of, I think we'll really just kind of carry over status quo, really, because it's something that's part of EIM already. So that should be straightforward. And then finally, 33.11.9, talking about the settlement processes and, you know, payments and charges and all that will happen pursuant to Section 11, which is the main settlement section we're going to talk about in a moment. And just sort of cross-referencing back to there, it's sort of effectively just saying the normal settlement processes we apply for EIM entities and CAISO internal entities, you know, all of that will basically apply for EDM in terms of the settlement statements and all that sort of stuff. So again, I'll pause here for any questions that have come up on 33.11. Give it a moment there, and then I'll pass the baton to John. So maybe while he's getting ready to gear up, if there are any final questions, you know, please speak up now. Otherwise, we'll, I guess, close this document and open up the Section 11 document.
Thanks, David.
Silas, could we give presenting rights back to John Anders, please?
Absolutely, just 1 second. There you go, John.
Okay. See. All right, just to confirm, I think everyone should be able to see my screen now. So where we were just at in Section 33.11, I'm not going to remember I think it was .5 or somewhere in there. It was real-time settlements, and there was a couple of provisions, very few, that in any way really dealt with some distinction about EDM market participants. And I think the main one was that they're not subject to or assess the imbalance. Imbalance. I mean the. Now I'm forgetting the name of the charge. The over/under scheduling charges. Yeah, and that's because they're a day-ahead market participant, similar to CAISO. So that's one of the real few distinctions. Pretty much everything else, once you get into the real-time market, and the differences are pretty much not material. And the EDM market participants who are in the real time are now essentially EIM market participants and are settled as accordingly, except for certain things like their day-ahead schedules become their base schedules. So that's the benchmark or measuring point by which we measure imbalance settlements and all those kinds of things. But otherwise, it's the same settlement as exists today in the energy imbalance market. and in that sense relative to base schedules as opposed to day-ahead schedules. So for Section 11, so now we're into real-time market settlements in Section 11, and there's quite a bit of material in here, and all of this is still applicable in terms of the references from Section 29.11 back to Section 11, and all of these basic categories of charges are going to apply. There was a few places where we've now gone from what was the system marginal energy cost to the marginal energy cost as the reference point for these settlement charges. And then we get into some area where there was a few questions. So we had a question, I can't recall from who, about whether or not the same approaches would apply within the EDAM. In other words, so this is these LAP load distribution factors, and so we've added some clarifying language shaded in yellow here that this does apply in the day-ahead market in real-time dispatch to meet our demand in the CAISO, and it's only within the CAISO BAA, and within an EDAM BAA, it's EDAM demand, and it's the corresponding LAP at those locations. So we've made that clear, and we've made parallel changes so that it now applies to both the CAISO BAA and then to EDAM BAAs. All right, now we're going to slow down just a little bit because we're going to get into sections where there's a good deal of red line changes, from the original tariff language. And this is all associated with the change to how congestion revenue is calculated in the EIM today. Congestion revenue and the associated offsets include pretty much all the transfer revenues in the EDAM and the EIM after implementation of EDAM. Those get separated. So you have a separate settlement for the congestion, which is what occurs within each BAA, and then you have the settlement of the transfer revenues across between the BAAs. And we covered all that in Section 3311. But there's some corresponding changes that are necessary to reflect that in the real-time settlements as well. And so that's really what's driving all of these changes here in Section 11.5.4. And so we had some questions in this area. So the first one was 6 cities, and I hope I just answered that question, why EDAM requires settlement changes in the real-time market. And so these provisions that are being redlined were amended extensively when the energy imbalance market was initiated, and they're now being amended again for the extended day-ahead market. So the next question we had was PacifiCorp, asking for some clarification about the section, and there's also another dimension to this. It's also in response to the 6 cities. The greenhouse gas settlement, in addition, does require non-zero offset amounts, and so that's another reason why we have to make changes in the real-time market settlements. Okay, moving on, they had a question from PacifiCorp, just seeking to clarify this term. What does it mean to vary across a balancing authority area? So here in this kind of high-level section, we've added the yellow shaded language to make it a little bit clearer, but we think that the concept of varying prices across the BAA is an appropriate term, and we've added the across FMM and RDD LMPs from sources to sinks within and across the EIM area to make sure that it was a complete statement and help to make that more clear. And then Pacificor, another question. They were wondering if it was within or among, and so we've clarified this to say that these allocations are received from within the balancing areas in the EDAM area, and not necessarily among. They're not sharing any longer. They're actually individually collecting congestion revenues that are due to them separately for the congestion within their balancing area. Okay, so now we're going to get into the different offset calculations, and this was all existing language. So this has been removed, the reference to the GHG as now a separate calculation. So this is no longer relevant here. And previously we had stricken this yellow shaded language as well, but we're restoring that language, this next version, to reflect the financial accounting of the transfers. We sort of overly edited the originally published version, and upon further reflection, we're clarifying that this settlement is now occurring at those transfer locations, and that we're settling the marginal cost, the congestion and marginal cost of losses, and that the energy settlement is really what's occurring within the transfer revenue settlement. So we're still doing the marginal congestion and marginal loss settlement according to these rules, and really just extracting out that transfer revenue settlement from what was here before, which was these offset calculations. So that's why we've clarified this in terms of the imbalance energy offset. Okay, so then now we're going down this calculation. So we have kind of a few changes here. Again, the GHG revenue reference comes out. That's not part of this calculation anymore. And then because we do have now EDAM and EBAAs with convergence bidding, we've had to account for them in this calculation as well. And we've captured the exclusion down at the end, which is the marginal GHG cost, as was done before. So we think this is basically the initial real-time imbalance energy offset calculation, and the allocation then is done as it was previously, no change there, and any residual goes to neutrality. So that was the energy offsets. Then we get into the congestion offsets. And so here we are again doing the determination based on the contribution at each resource location intertie in the BAAs based on the location of the constraints. So this is sort of a parallel to the day ahead calculations in the real time. And then we have the offsets and how those are determined. And we basically calculate those as, and here's the formulation of that. And we've changed this slightly to now we're no longer distinguishing between different kinds of interties that operate in or out or both, and all of the different permutations of that. This becomes much more simpler now that you've removed the transfer revenue calculations and you're just dealing with congestion offsets between BAAs. So we really can deal with it globally, all as EIM interties without distinction. And then we can just do the calculation, and primarily here in B1, and then in B3, we have adjustments for the legacy contracts and ownership rights and all of that. because the transmission that is made available in the day ahead also is entitled to these revenues in the real time. So we had some questions in this, and so PAC was essentially asking why they would receive these costs in addition. And so we've made it clear that these are the transmission customers under the pathway 2. And then they're all also requesting clarification. And so we've added some language here to say that these are the transmission service provider customer rights. So under 3318. So these are really the legacy contracts, the ownership rights, and then there's a broader category of OAT transmission or tariff transmission customers that make their transmission available under pathway 2. So hopefully that clarifies that adjustment, because that will get taken off the top of those revenues before they're allocated out. Here we have some additional adjustments to congestions for the virtual bidding, and then for the final allocation. Okay, I'm going to go through until I get to the transfer revenue, and then we'll double check for questions. But so for marginal cost of losses, there's no real changes here, just a little clarification on some terminology, because we did make those changes to Appendix C and some defined terms to clarify things, and we want to make sure to reflect that throughout. And then lastly, in the real time, you have the GHG, greenhouse gas offsets, and no changes there. Okay, so before we get into the real time and the transfer revenues, let's open it up for questions or comments on the real time offsets, which, you know, congestion, losses, et cetera. Okay. All right, so now we've made our changes above to reflect the separate settlement of transfer revenues, and those were the offsets. And then we've done the same in the day ahead in 3311. So then here in section 11, because we're in the real-time settlements, we need to reflect the calculation and allocation of the transfer revenues that are also accruing on these sort of price differences in the real-time market. So our first question in this area came from Amex, and they were questioning what happens if there's internal and external interties operating, and whether there's some infeasibilities created and there should be transfer revenue sharing on them, but not on others, and how does all this work? So our answer is that essentially there is no such thing as the internal and external interties and all of the different permutations that we had before. Like we said above, when we were dealing with the offsets, that we've simplified this because now we're in the real time in the EIM area, and we're dealing with all these different transfers across EIM interties, and there's it should all, you know, pencil out. We no longer need to account for the different permutations at different intertie locations. So that's the general answer there. And then when we get into the allocation, PacifiCorp had a suggestion, just phrasing that the word distribute is better than dividing, and we're fine with that. And we made some further incremental changes shaded in yellow to kind of carry that through, the clarity, I mean, and then we have made some other changes here to align this transfer revenue allocation with the transfer revenue allocations in the day ahead in section 3311 to make sure that these applicable commercial arrangements are reflected as agreed upon by the balancing areas. And there was some discussion around that in section 3311. Okay. So now we have the transfer revenue, we've calculated it, and we're in the allocation, so we know who to allocate it to, and then what happens to that revenue. And so for the ISO BAA, it's allocated, or sub-allocated, I should say, in accordance with the ISO tariff, including allocation to those scheduling coordinators for the existing contracts and transmission ownership rights, consistent with the terms of the agreements. And BAMX requested that we reflect the possibility for different agreements to apply, and we think that it should be covered here, so the transfer revenues are addressed as far as if you qualify for sub-allocation as an existing right or an ownership interest, then you will receive your transfer revenue in real time, from real time, according to this provision here. And then we had to have a provision for a BAA that is not in the EDAM, so they did not have day-ahead transfers. So those are accounted for under this provision, and that sub-allocation needs to occur at their level in accordance with their tariff. And then we have a different sub-allocation for an EIM BAA that's in the day-ahead market, and then we have to make some distinction here about the allocation and the formulation and whether the transmission was made available under which pathway and all of that. And so that's what we've attempted to do here with some additional cross-reference for further specificity and clarity. So that's what these yellow shaded language is intended to do, is to make that more clear. And I think that's mostly it for transfer revenues. So let's go ahead and open up, see if we have any questions on real-time calculation and allocation of what we're calling EIM transfer revenues. That's for the real-time version of the.
So as a reminder, if you have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And if you connected to audio outside of the WebEx, you'll need to press #2.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to use, skip ahead because I don't think there's a lot of comments. There's a lot of material. We kind of threw in a little extra material beyond what we would reflect in just the red line section, just so everyone had better context. And of course, having done so now, raised some additional questions, which is fine. So again, we're still in 11.5, so real time, and they're asking for clarification, 6 cities, about exceptional dispatch, and the answer there is that this provision does not apply, because in the WEIM there is no exceptional dispatch for authority for the ISO. The EIM BAAs issue manual dispatches in the real-time market, and those are settled according to the rules in Section 29. So there shouldn't be any changes here as part of the EDM. All right, so again, a question about ancillary services. We've touched on this in a few places, mostly with the self-provision and how that works. But the 6 cities raised a question about will EDAM transfers be excluded? And again, it's a similar question from the calculation of upwards ancillary services. And so we've clarified that EDAM transfers and EIM transfers with an EDAM BAA is not part of this calculation. And I did see a hand go up from, I think it was Alva. Go ahead and take the question.
Hi, can you hear me?
I got you. Yeah, thanks.
Just a point of curiosity. So the ISO has no exceptional dispatch authority in other BAAs in real time. You've said, does that mean there's no, all the exceptional dispatch authority around batteries will not apply from the energy storage enhancements? And I hadn't really realized that this was specific only to CAISO. So I just wanted to ask that question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And just as background, you know, the idea in the real time and it's extending to the day ahead as well. The ISO, you know, is the market operator, so we're not the BA or the TOP or any of those other functions. And so we issue dispatch instructions up to the economic limits of the bids that have been submitted. And beyond that, we do not, you know, have exceptional dispatch authority. We call that EDs in CAISO BAA, and then we call it a manual dispatch or MD in a WEIM or now an EDAM BAA. And so that's how we account for that. Some of the functionality is similar in our systems, and the coding of it gets a little complicated, but I think what you're asking is, are there rules associated with batteries that rely on exceptional dispatch authority in some way that would be problematic or not somehow extend the benefit of those rules into the EDAM? And I'm not the storage expert, and I don't know if we have anyone else on here that can answer that question, if that's what you're asking, Alba.
Yeah, that's basically, I mean, I'm still getting, I'm trying to understand the difference between and you explained it very well, actually, the market operators authority and the BAA authority in the discussions of energy storage enhancements. It's been a bit, that distinction has been a bit fuzzy because of the whole discussion of hold state of charge, basically replacing some other modeling types of in the market that would previously existed. So I think you've explained it well as far as you can, unless somebody else has more to add. I think you've answered the question. So thank you.
And anyone else on the ISO team? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Alba. Yeah, we don't want to, you know, because sometimes we do things in, you know, market enhancements for the ISO's BA or markets in general, day ahead market in particular, and don't always think about the, you know, other BAAs at this time because we're in the process of extending the day ahead market. So yeah, good to think about that. All right, we're going to go to the next comment. Okay, so here again, we are getting into some more of the settlements provisions, and here we had a neutrality question, and essentially 6 cities, I think, was asking if you know, if EDAM participants, EIM participants, and all those folks were CAISO creditors and could be exposed or accounted for in these calculations, and the answer is yes. It's you know, in the definition of a CAISO creditor, it should include EDAM participants because they're a business associate to which amounts are due or payable under the terms of the CAISO tariff and agreements, and a business associate, any entity within the CAISO interacts related to the CAISO market. So yes, ISO creditor would include EIM and EDAM participants. Okay, so another question from the 6 cities about this term EIM measured demand. And then if the dispute deals with the day-ahead market, should the ISO spread it to the EDAM measured demand? And I don't think we have a concept of EDAM measured demand or a new defined term proposed for that, but we do have that the EIM measured demand does include all BAs in the EIM, and it will include EDAM BAAs, right? Because they're in the day-ahead market and also the real-time market. So when they're in the real-time market, this term EIM measured demand would apply and pick up that concept. So we don't think there's a need to add a new defined term to capture this, neutrality adjustment. We'll pick it up as part of EIM measured demand when that day-ahead participants in the real-time market. So that. We're back. Other creditors, again, same answer in this context, whether or not the term ISO creditors would include EDAM and EIM participants. All right, so then we have an under delivery charge for deviations and interties, and here we have the existing calculation for these charges, and 6 cities is curious to understand if this applies to EDAM, sorry, and I think our answer is that this will not apply, so there's no over/under scheduling delivery at the interties for EDAM entities, and that they have sort of penalties in their tariff already for failure to deliver at an intertie into their BAA. So the delivery of supply into their BAA is covered under their tariffs and not necessarily under the ISO's tariff or assessment of these over scheduling charges for transactions at the interties, and whether or not they are failed to deliver or over or under their scheduled delivery. Okay, so now we're back to the top. Okay, so that is all of the comments or questions we received in our draft of section 11, which is mostly published because it's the real-time settlements, and it brings together the real-time settlements for EIM participants and the changes there, and also a few clarifications and connections with the EDAM participants in their settlements here as well as section 33.11. So any general questions or comments on section 11? Okay, I'll look at my schedule here. So I think what probably makes the most sense is for us to go to section 27 next, and I can open this up and continue sharing, and I think this one will include a few different folks on the ISO team. So I can drive along if I can look to folks along the way. We'll weigh in on changes here in section 27. Let me go ahead and share. Okay. All right. So section 27, it's quite a number of provisions here, and it's all about the markets and processes in the day in real time. And most all of this applies without any kind of real exception to both the WEIM and soon the extended day ahead market. And there are some special provisions about the the price discovery mechanism, the sort of the for 6 months and those kinds of things, and they're covered in section 29.27 or 33.27. But largely, section 27 applies. But I think there were some changes, and these were mostly proposed to reflect the additional changes to Appendix C, and then also to clarify that the integrated balancing authority area provisions would not apply to EDAM participants. So we'll get to those. And so I'm just going to go through and see where we received comments. So we'll start out in the first section. Again, the 6 cities wanted clarification that we're not procuring ancillary services outside of the balancing area. That is true. The ISO at this time does not co-optimize. It's possible in the future that EDAM could include that functionality. It doesn't now, and it is covered in section 33. So let's see, I got a hand from Alva, so we'll go ahead and take that question, Alva.
Just a quick one on in this whole area of as you list these services, are you just going to add the term imbalance reserves now that DAME has been approved and can be folded into the tariff? Or are you expecting to make a separate tariff change to bring those in, and whatever changes there might be in terms of how that gets settled?
All right, I'll answer briefly, and then David can unmute himself or whatever. But the basic idea is that David will be publishing DAME tariff language shortly that'll reflect the scope of changes to support DAME, and the EDAM tariff changes that we've been reviewing mostly assume that DAME will be in existence and have cross-references and simple use of defined terms like you mentioned, imbalance reserves, but don't elaborate or seek to amend every possible section that might be needed to support DAME. So David, did I get that right, or you want to add more details?
Well, I guess what I'd just say for now is that we, between the two initiatives, there was not much overlap outside of, say, section 33. But, I think your specific question was in 27, shouldn't I add an additional reference to the existence of imbalance reserves? And yes, that I'm almost certain the draft edits in 27 to implement DAME have that, in that you were just asking about here.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alpha. And I'd go further and say that whatever the description of those products are going to be, and how that's procured and all of that, priced and everything, that's all part of DAME, and David will be reflecting that.
Yeah, and that's really helpful too, because I was about to ask a question at the end about the where we've had some concerns about the imbalance settlement on imbalance reserves, but that won't be appropriate until he produces that. So thanks. For solving that question.
Just,
no problem.
Just for preview, when you're saying the imbalance settlement, this was the imbalance between imbalance reserves and the
real-time
5-minute or 15-minute dispatchable part of the FRP. That
yes,
element?
yes, yeah.
Okay, sure. Well, yeah, that's there's a lot of detail to get through on that one. So, sure.
Well, thank you. Much
hang
appreciated.
tight, and you'll get your chance.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I will. Yeah. So here we are. We're working through the EDAM tariff before the DAME tariff, but that's just where we are. So we'll keep going, and it'll all come clear, and all come back together again in due time. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so here we had, like I indicated, some minor changes to talk about the changes in Appendix C. So now we have, we have 4 components, and we have the marginal greenhouse gas component as one of the 4th, and no longer is it a system marginal energy cost, it is a marginal energy cost. So those changes are reflected here. And we had a question from WPTF, and I think that was a good clarification. And that was, I think we said before, the system, which kind of sounded more like, well, it was the previous language. We had just removed the system from here, but it's the MEC is the same throughout each, balancing area, and so each balancing area has a marginal energy cost associated with it. Here, I think it just said marginal cost losses. So we can't help ourselves sometimes and make these little clarifying changes as we read the tariff. Hopefully, it makes sense to everybody. So here in the marginal cost of losses, we had a question from the 6 cities about how this would apply. And I honestly think that for now, it's the CAISO control grid and the CAISO BAA, and that it's not going to change unless until an entity like the Los Angeles Water Power joins, where some of these rights that are held. In this case, I think these are the southern, the 6 cities or the southern municipal utilities rights on LA's transmission facilities that are outside of the ISO's balancing area, and how the losses would accrue and be calculated on all of that. But I don't know that I have anything more to say than we just don't think this is an issue at this time. But David, anything else you want to add on this?
Yes. No, there's nothing to add for me.
Okay. Sorry to keep putting you on the spot, but again, I'm going to just keep going. If anyone, please raise your hand or anything, and we'll pause and go back if we need to. All right. So now, again, we're moving through the components, and we're into the congestion calculation. So here we've made some clarifications to align with Appendix C, and most of the details around that calculation are in Appendix C. And then next we have added a new provision to capture this other component, the marginal greenhouse gas cost. And we have a question from WPTF that they were looking to expand the definition to clarify that marginal energy costs wouldn't be somehow subsumed within that. It'd be pure marginal GHG cost. And I'm going to have to defer to Andrew. I'm sure he could answer it better than me. So, Andrew, is there anything more other than what you've got here in your response that Appendix C explains the formulation, and you don't think there's a sort of a commingling here?
Yeah, hi, John. It's Andrew. Sort of thinking about WPTF's comment, this section may benefit from a little bit more explanatory text. Certainly, I think Appendix C will, cover the formulation, but specifying that it will be a positive component of the locational marginal price, and also potentially, explaining that in some pricing nodes that component will be 0. May be beneficial just for clarity. So I will take the comment back and keep thinking about this between now and the next draft we publish.
Okay. That sounds good. I made a small note there. All right, so now we're moving along again, just conforming changes for consistency to the disconnected P-node pricing. And let me go to the next comment. Okay, so now we're into the transmission constraint relaxation parameters in the pricing. And I think that the definition of transmission constraint is quite broad and includes intertie constraints and, internal constraints and everything in between. So we don't think any changes are necessary here. Okay, so now we have another section where you have ISO BAA treatment, and so this is the protection, if you will, or the adjustments that are made in terms of the scheduling priorities for ETC and TORs in the CAISO BAA, and so they wanted Pacific request some clarification as to how this relates to the EDAM legacy contracts and OAT transmission priorities. So for the legacy contracts and ownership rights, we've added a cross-reference in section 33.16 and 17 to reflect that. And then for the OAT transmission scheduling priorities, those are specifically dealt with in the new section 33.18.3, which was published as a short addendum following, I guess it was a week ago, the stakeholder workshop a week ago. We published a little addendum, and we're continuing to refine that language to improve its accuracy, but that's the structure. So here are the CAISO TORTCs, which are not changing the reference back to these provisions in the legacy and EDAM ownership rights provisions, and then sort of a translation, if you will, of this higher scheduling priority to reflect the OAT transmission rights that are self-scheduled in advance of the day-ahead market in accordance with the EDAM transmission service provisions. So that's how all this kind of fits together. So no changes here to existing ISO rules on scheduling priority. Okay, so now we have this question from 6 cities, just essentially the space market model and the CAISO market. And so just broadly speaking, the day-ahead market and the real-time market are clearly CAISO markets, and by extension, their operation in other BAAs in the day-ahead or real-time are also CAISO markets. So all of this should be covered in the EIM and incorporated into section 33 and 29, as the full network model does rely on the base market model. The base market model expands when you add other BAAs to the model. As the energy imbalance market expanded, the base market model was expanded, in addition to the full network model that is also used. So there's several different models, but this should be covered in those sections accordingly, and no changes needed here. All right. Okay, so then we had, and I think I mentioned this at the top, the integrated balancing authority provisions of the CAISO tariff, and 6 cities was curious what happened to the IBA construct under EDAM. And so here, under EDAM, if if a BAA, so an integrated balancing authority area, and I think they're called out in, I don't know if it's in this section. Oh, here it is, currently established, and the ISO has not included any others. These are all balancing areas embedded within the CAISO balancing authority area or integrated in the CAISO balancing area, and we're subject to a whole lots of provision before and these provisions of the ISO tariff, and they are currently under market efficiency agreements with the ISO to implement more accurate pricing, and those continued in the energy imbalance market. However, once those entities are in the day-ahead market, then the ISO has all the information it needs to do the calculations and understand the flows completely, and there becomes no need for these special provisions for the integrated balancing area, because it's sort of in the day-ahead on a similar, an equivalent basis to the ISO, and all of that is no longer necessary. So that's the exclusion in section 33.27. Okay, so another same question about the market efficiency agreement. So if the entity stays in the EIM only as today, then the IBA continues to apply, and I think most of these BAAs, if not all, have or operate under a market efficiency agreement. And then basically for everyone who wants to know, that that's an agreement where they provide additional details on the modeling and of their generation within their balancing area, and then they receive a price that's reflective of a location in their balancing area as opposed to the intertie location at Captain Jack. So that stays in the EIM and goes away in the EDAM. Okay. Low distribution factors. 6 cities had a question whether these would continue to be administered, and yes, it's part of administering the market. And this, again, like I said at the outset, Section 27, almost without exception, applies in the day-ahead market, or the EDAM, the extended day-ahead market. Another question, similarly, whether to apply on the CAISO grid after EDAM, or the CAISO would have only limited authority to enforce constraints, and with other BAAs, operators have such an ability and authority to enforce constraints under their control, their oaths. So this is it's not complicated, and the simple answer, I suppose, is yes. So the ISO will continue as the BA and TOP in its balancing area and enforce transmission constraints in the CAISO markets within its BAA. The EIM entities today, they have this ability to enforce transmission constraints in the CAISO market, the real-time market, outside the CAISO BAA in their BAAs, as that is their responsibility, and they're able to utilize the market and to reflect those constraints so that the outcomes are appropriate. This would carry forward into the extended day-ahead market. So yes, there could be transmission constraints enforced through the CAISO markets that were located in a BAA outside of the ISO BAA. So that's the short answer to that, without getting into any details. But this is all done either A, through the implementation process, or B, on an ongoing basis. And generally, the CAISO and the entities sort of work together to try to determine the best configuration of these sorts of constraints. And then it's up to the transmission operators to to determine the associated limits on these types of constraints. But yeah, that's the sort of separation function and all of that. All right, again, state estimator. Yes, state estimator operates in the real time and will continue. And that would include the EDAM entity BAAs in the real time. Yeah, but it's a real time solution, state estimator. And I don't think it goes out. I don't know how far it looks out, but it's real-time estimator of the solution with some forward-looking time horizon. But yeah, it's going to continue to exist as is. All right, where we are. Oh, aggregate capability constraints. Okay, so these are constraints that the CAISO can enforce on generating facilities to reflect their maximum and minimum capabilities. And there was a question about whether this would restrict the provision of ancillary services. And we have a question or some comment and clarifications that it will apply in the context of EDAM resources for the self-provision of ancillary services. Just to clarify that it is involved in EDAM there. Okay, I'll just highlight that if anybody wants to look at that change, and I will open it up for any questions at all on section 27 or what we've been through so far. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'll make one comment, I guess, within the next day or two. Think we think it would be beneficial to go ahead and post the working version similar to what we did for section 33, so that everyone has kind of a midstream working draft of all the materials that were covered in the workshops. And again, just like we were with section 33, we're going to continue our work and continue to refine and improve the draft tariff language for publication as a second draft. But I think hopefully these working versions will help everyone along the way and give everyone a little bit of a head start when the formal second draft of the tariff language is reviewed. And we are going to take the time that we have, which is a couple of weeks, to really, dot our I's and cross our T's and check cross-references and all those kinds of things, so that next draft is not only complete, but is, clear and understood, and hopefully answers everyone's questions and comments so far, at least as discussed through these workshops. But everyone will have another opportunity on the draft tariff language. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's going to take us to Appendix A. And 218, we're moving right along here. Okay, find this document. And so this Appendix A, kind of as it is the defined terms and the ISO's master definition supplement of the tariff, it does include a little bit of everything. So I'll be looking around the room for others to weigh in. We have done our best to address the comments we've received. And again, just so everyone knows, we have the list of new defined terms. And so if they include the intro phrase EDAM or EIM, then they're specific to those. And sometimes they are, they're generic. So they refer to a default generation gap, for example, or the day and marginal G is included in both the day and the real time. And answer this question here, because I haven't gotten back to this. The challenges of doing a work in progress. Okay, so it looks like we've added a new definition for the day-ahead GHG offset costs, and that has included a reference to that calculation and how that's determined. We had a question from 6 cities, and this is going to need clarification. So the DGAP, so this is a new defined term. This term applies to EAAs outside the, I think it's the market area. So this is essentially what ends up happening is when you have supply coming in from outside of the market area, then those supply nodes are aggregated into a default location with that distribution factors to determine the source of the supply. So these are the 2 DGAPs that are being proposed. I think one for the Northwest and one for the Southwest. That's we talked about previously in the tariff materials. So the 6 cities is correct in answering their question. And we need to make this clarification. Okay. So the diversity benefit, there was a request for a cross-reference to update, but it will be updated on finalization of the DAME tariff. That's the diversity benefit from the resource efficiency evaluation and how that's determined, but it's calculated in section to be determined with the DAME tariff and then the EIM tariff. All right, so we had a question. This gets back into our discussion on several occasions about what do these different terms mean. So that there are three terms. The EDAM area, so that is the combined CAISO BAA and EDAM entity BAAs. And that's why we say a BAA in the EDAM area when we mean everybody. But we only want to talk about each one within that area. So that's the EDAM area. And similarly, the EIM area, I won't go there now, but it's similarly defined. So it includes the CAISO BAA and all EIM BAAs, which includes all EDAM BAAs. And then in the context of Appendix C, we included a new concept of market area, and that was sort of a transient definition between in the day-ahead, the market area is the day-ahead market, and then as you move to the real-time, that expands to the the real-time or EIM area. I saw I don't know, it was a chat or somewhere come up a question. It asked when we would publish the updated versions. So give us a day or two. We've been, pretty busy working our way through all these meetings, and we don't have them all staged and ready to go. But we'll do that. It also takes time through our internal publication procedures to get the market notice and get things queued up for publication. But I'd say midweek this week we should be getting those materials out, so that should come out on the the market notice page, and then published on the EDAM stakeholder initiative webpage. Okay, so then we had a question about EDAM demand, and Six Cities was interested in striking the word entity to clarify that this also includes ISO demand, and we think that this is intentionally excludes the CAISO BAA, so that we're captured as CAISO demand. In other words, demand is the term used on a BAA by BAA basis and not on a sort of an EDAM area or EIM area basis. But I did see Bonnie's hand go up, so Bonnie, you want to go ahead with your question?
Bonnie Blair for the Six Cities. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I got you, thanks.
Good, thanks. So does that mean then that anytime the tariff intends to refer to all demand in the EDAM, you are going to say, or all demand within the EDAM area, let me put it that way, you're either going to say something like demand within the EDAM area, or are you going to say EDAM entity balancing authority area or EDAM demand plus CAISO demand? In other words, if you separate CAISO demand from EDAM demand, then when you mean all the demand, you're going to have to say both, I think.
Right. So I'll queue up James here, see if I'll get his attention here. But I'm not, and it's not all in my head, but I don't recall areas where we had the concept of demand on the area-wide basis. But I could be missing something, and if we did, Bonnie, the way you've characterized it would be the way we would correct it, rather than, I suppose we could create a new defined term that captured everything, but our preference has been to use the existing terms and sort of combine them, or that way we can use them exclusive to the EDAM area, or inclusive with the sort of the CAISO or others. So James, do we have provisions that rely on the concept of EDAM area-wide demand? In other words, including the ISO BAA and other EDAM BAAs? We don't in real time that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Not at the moment. We do have provisions that are going to be very much concentrated on the EDAM BAA demand or EDAM demand. So that's why we had focused it here. We don't have anything at the moment that basically allocates across the BAAs in the day-ahead market.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I just thought, I haven't attempted to do a complete, search of the tariff, but it just seemed highly likely to me that there were going to be some types of costs or revenues potentially that would be allocated across all of the demand in the day ahead market, including CAISO, as well as all participating EDAM entities. I guess
have to go
I
back.
can't be 100% sure of that, but it just seemed so likely that.
Right. So we can go back through and look at it, but right now, all of the products, energy, imbalance reserve, reliability, capacity, when it comes to allocation, it's to within that BAA. There isn't one that go across the entire EDAM footprint. Same with congestion and loss offset and any energy offsets. So they're very much BAA specific. I think what you're referring to is probably when we start getting into rounding or neutrality issues. At that point, that is past day ahead, and we're now getting it, including real time. And so that's why we have the EIM area meter demand or EIM area measure demand. But I'll go back and double check.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate your big picture perspective on some of these things. And that last point, EIM measure demand, we were just talking about that at the end of whatever it was, section we just were covering today. Okay, we're gonna keep going. So then there's no comment here, but I think we did receive some requests for clarification of the definitions associated with these different pools. And this is the downward pool. And so what you're seeing here in yellow is a reflection of those additional clarifications and how that works in terms of what's in the who's in the downward pool and what this means. And ISO team, you're all welcome to jump in if you had a specific comment or something that you thought was appropriate or important at any particular point along the way. So here we have a question from Pacific Core, and they wanted to clarify the term transmission service providers and how that works. And we've updated sort of the definitions, and also we had provided the new EDAM transmission service provider agreement to reflect that. But otherwise, this definition of what an external intertie should remain correct for purposes of reference. And we had NV Energy. They wanted some additional clarification to make sure that this didn't confuse whether the contract, who the contract was with, and who the customer was. So we've added this language here in yellow to try to clarify that it's the contract between the customer and the transmission service provider, not otherwise governed by the terms of the tariff, or that was entered into, whatever prior to or otherwise not governed to by. Okay, 6 cities, question whether or not the term EDAM load serving entity includes LSEs within the CAISO BAA, and the answer is no. For the CAISO BAA, I do believe this term load serving entity is generic, and when we are in the ISO tariff and mean load serving entity, we just use that term. And we're in the EDAM and we mean a load serving entity outside the CAISO BAA, we would use this term here. Okay, NV Energy wanted a clarification and was concerned about whether this would include the merchant function, the municipal utilities and all that. And so what we've done, as opposed to changes here, we've made some changes in section 33.4 under roles and responsibilities, and clarified that the EDAM entity basically, you know, would be an EDAM load serving entity, and they have now a separate agreement they would execute, so that the merchant side of the vertically integrated utility would execute the EDAM load serving agreement, and probably the EDAM, you know, or EIM, participating resource agreement, and be responsible for that, as opposed to the entity, which is typically the transmission function and balancing function, would not be responsible for that. And then for the management of all of that, just like in the energy imbalance market, the ISO will issue certificates and that are configured to allow access to the appropriate interfaces, and the entity would provision access to those facilities according to their roles and responsibilities within their organization, to align with their, you know, different functional separations and all that, so that you know, the right people were having access to the right applications. All right. So 6 cities wanted to know again whether this was included CAISO BA, and the answer again, no. It's only an EDAM load serving entity, and that does not include generic load serving entities in the CAISO BAA. Again, similar question for 6 cities, and our answer is the same. So an EDAM market participant, which are all of these different folks here, are CAISO market participants, but a CAISO market participant that is not otherwise an EDAM market participant cannot become an EDAM market participant. So in other words, in order to be an EDAM market participant, you need to be subject to one of the agreements associated with these roles and responsibilities under Section 33. So it doesn't work the other way around. I think similar question in EDAM resource. So again, the same answer. If EDAM resource is included, and we'll get to the definitions below, of a generating unit, as is an EIM resource, or sorry, participating resource, but not the other way around. So hopefully this is a one-way street, bringing in external resources and external balancing areas, and not a two-way street extending all of the otherwise applicable rules from CAISO BAA participants out into the other BAAs. That would not be good. Okay, so again, here we have, I think this is the discussion we had back and forth in the roles and responsibilities in other areas of the tariff. You can see it plainly here. They have the EDAM resource, which is the owner-operator, and then the resource facility, which is the physical facilities capable of delivering curtailable demand, energy, blah, blah, blah. And it must be located within an EDAM BAA, and then listed in an addendum to an agreement. And you have that parallel for the scheduling coordinator, and we have shortened the EDAM RSE, and I think we have a parallel term for EIM RSE now to help clarify that. And then we're going to get into some surcharge calculations, and I'm going to see if Heather wants to walk anybody through this. I don't, not as familiar with all of these provisions as she.
Hey, John. Sorry, I have a little bit of background noise. We covered these as we went through the surcharge discussion on Friday, because these are intimately related to the surcharge. And of course,
Okay.
if anyone had questions or comments, in the offline time, I'm of course, happy to take those. but, and I tried to use that dark blue highlighting just to indicate that we had already gone through it. But like I said, happy to take any discussion if folks would like. I guess I'll note as John scrolls through, just overall, I was cleaning up the yellow highlighting you see removed of EDAM RSE. Again, I was just kind of cleaning up some administrative issues. Again, we clarified Pacific time and for our hours for the surcharge. And we stated that here, just fixed a little capitalization on ancillary services. John, you can probably keep going. I didn't mean to highlight all of that in blue, but you can ignore that. I'll fix that later. And then, yeah, and then I think we're down into some other provisions, but there will be some more RSE related surcharges. But like I said, I think we vetted those as we walked through 33.11 last time.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, appreciate that. That's helpful. All right, so we're going to keep going. I will go take our next comment. And hopefully some of our edits here have clarified, but Envy Energy correctly suggested that we make it clear that it's a network transmission customer would actually have transmission rights at an intertie, and so we wanted to make sure that this did not include NITS customers, but we didn't want to restrict it beyond that because we want to make sure that other rights at interties are included within the transmission service provider provision. And here you have a new definition for the term and transmission service provider agreement, as we discussed in the context, and we'll go over that when we get to the changes in Appendix B. There's some more of those RSE changes Heather was talking about. So we have the upward pool, and then we have the EIM RSE, and then we get back into other definitions and keep going with comments, but we have a bunch of GHG related defined terms, which are all generic because they apply in both day ahead and real time. We have that market area definition I mentioned, and a market transfer and the concept of the transfer back and forth, and this is relevant for the Appendix C calculations, as well as the net market transfer and real-time offsets for GHG, and then transfer locations and system resources. Okay. Before I move into the amended definitions, which many of which are to add the concept of EDAM to provisions that already included or were amended to include the WEIM or EIM in the tariff, and so we wanted to complete that picture so they would apply in both the day-ahead and real-time markets. But before we go there, anybody else on questions on new definitions or proposed new definitions?
So again, to raise your hand, you can do so by pressing the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen or by pressing #2.
All right, so like I said, I'll go through the comments. A lot of these changes are just to carry forward the extended day-ahead market into these provisions. So here we had a question from the 6 cities, and they just sought some clarification, and I think we've added the concept of EDAM resource facilities, whether they include ISO resources. And I think I explained that previously, that we do not believe that they are included. But, and this is the ACC, I think that's that aggregate capability constraint, and that discussion there. So that's not an issue as far as we can see, but we have made these clarifying edits here. So interchange schedule. So Six Cities was curious if this also applied to other BAAs, and the answer is generally this is meant to include any BAAs. It's kind of a generic term, but we've added the including language just for emphasis to make that abundantly clear in case there was any confusion, because it does say between the CAISO BAA and another BAA, and so that's between the CAISO BAA and an EDAM BAA or EIM BAA, and then for purposes of the day ahead between an EDAM, a BAA and another BAA, and the EIM or the real-time market, EIM, BAA and another BAA. So a bit clunky, but it works. GHG, Six Cities, it should say into that GHG regulation area, and outside of a regulation into a GHG regulation area. So we are not making this change, and I'm not sure. I think it's it needs to be generic, but maybe Andrew, if you have a view on this, you could help me out.
Yeah, hi, John. It's Andrew. So I think we are staying with just the way we framed it. We'll review, I guess, Six Cities' comment. But I see the point, I guess, that they're making, which is that we've got a generic definition. And there will be two different marginal greenhouse gas costs. So for two different greenhouse gas regulation areas at the outset. So we'll look at the proposed change and reflect on it and perhaps make it in the next iteration of our language.
I think Bonnie raised the hand. So Bonnie?
Hi again, Bonnie Blair for the Six Cities. Yeah, I think it's important to, I guess, into a GHG regulation area, you know, kind of generalizes the concept of marginal GHG costs, whereas my understanding is that at least most of the time, each GHG regulation area is going to have a marginal GHG cost for that GHG regulation area, as distinct from some other GHG regulation area. So, I mean, that was the intent of my suggestion.
Yeah, fair point, and you're correct. I would say that it's going to be, it would be extremely rare coincidence that, you know, the GHG marginal cost would be the same for the two GHG regulation areas at the outset of EDAM. So again, we'll take the edit back and look at making it. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for looking again.
Okay. Here again, Six Cities was questioning, and this is an existing term, and it is. I have to admit, I had to read it several times myself and ask a subject matter expert, but the net imbalance export actually occurs only when we're importing, so that's why it's a net, and so the net export is the net imbalance imported into the ISO from another BAA. So I have James if there's any further question about that, but that's my understanding, we did double check it, so thanks. Amen. All right, now we're back to the top. Okay, so then that takes us through all the comments we received on Appendix A. And, you know, if everybody's up for it, I know I have a bit of a scheduling challenge here. John Fomer, you have to step out, I think, from like 3 to 3:20. Is that right?
That's right. I could go till 3:05, so I could see how much I can do here and see if I can knock it off in 15 minutes. Or we can just go ahead and.
Yeah. Do you think you could get through it in 15 minutes?
I can try.
All right,
there were
let's
a lot
try.
of comments referring to it, so I think it's something that I think I can cover in
All right.
about 15 minutes. Yes.
All right,
Let's do it.
let's do that. And then if we can do that, we can get through Appendix F and skip the break and then just wrap it up for the day, I think.
Okay, sounds good. And I apologize to everybody. My video is acting up on me, so I don't think I'm going to be able to share my face on the screen. But I am John Spomer. I am an attorney in the legal department here at CAISO, and what I'm going to be doing is discussing the different pro forma agreements that we've developed for Exhibit B in the tariff that we're going to use to implement the extended day-ahead market. And at the outset, I want to thank those of you who provided your comments and edits to the agreements. They were very helpful, and I think in most cases we were able to incorporate those edits into the agreements. And I'll go through those each of those agreements in detail in a minute here. But before I do that, I just want to maybe at a high level discuss the three kinds of agreements that we're talking about here. And the first kind of agreement is the EDAM entity implementation agreement. This is sort of similar to the EIM entity implementation agreement, if you will. And what this agreement is designed for is it's designed for existing EIM entities who want to extend their participation into the day-ahead market. They would execute the implementation agreement with the CAISO, and pursuant to Section 33, they would make the deposit, and then we would work with them to essentially marry up, our systems and software with the entity's systems and software. That way, the entity could participate in the day-ahead market. The agreement would be obviously be subject to Section 33 and sort of the onboarding obligations and the milestones that the entity would have to hit along the way throughout the implementation period. And then once the implementation activities were completed and the entity was officially onboarded as an EDAM entity, that agreement would just sort of go away. So think of the implementation agreement as almost like a software services agreement in essence. So that's the first kind of agreement. The second kind of agreement that we've developed are addendums to existing pro forma EIM agreements, that many of you have signed already. And the agreements that I'm talking about specifically is we've prepared addendums to the EIM entity agreement, the EIM entity scheduling coordinator agreement, the EIM participating resource agreement, and the EIM participating resource scheduling coordinator agreement. And those addendums, as you'll see, they're short and sweet. What they're designed to do is to extend the entity's role into the day-ahead market, and to make sure that that new role is covered by Section 33 of the tariff. And what we've also done in the addendum that you'll see is that we've also built in this mechanism where, let's say, an EIM entity decides to become an EDAM entity. and it goes through the implementation period, and it's onboarded as an EDAM entity, and it participates in the day-ahead market for, let's say, 3 years or so, and then for whatever reason it decides it no longer wants to participate in the day-ahead market. The addendum will allow the entity to terminate its participation in the day-ahead market and simply revert back to being a participant in the EIM. So hopefully that will make it the process a little bit easier and smoother for people who, if they ultimately decide not to participate in the day-ahead market anymore, they can just revert back to being to participating in the EIM marketplace. Finally, the third kind of agreement that we've prepared we prepared 2 standalone agreements to account for new roles that are found in section 33.4. So one of those agreements is the EDAM LSE agreement. So it's designed for LSEs within an EDAM entity BAA who want to represent load in the day-ahead market. They would sign, an EDAM LSE agreement so that they could participate. Likewise, that agreement might also be useful to, let's say, a vertically integrated utility whose merchant side wants to represent load in the day-ahead market. That EDAM entity would also need to sign an LSE agreement as well in order to do that. And then finally, the other standalone agreement that we've prepared, this is the new one. This goes to the transmission service provider role. So this is an EDAM transmission service provider agreement, and it's designed to, like you saw in the new section 33.4.2, I believe, it's designed to sort of outline what the EDAM transmission service providers' roles and responsibilities are. And I know some stakeholders have raised some concerns about the EDAM entity being responsible for something that a TSP should be doing. And so we wanted to make sure that those roles were separate and responsibilities were separate and that everybody knew who was responsible for what. So that's what the transmission service provider agreement does. It's very short, and it essentially just incorporates the responsibilities that are set out in section 33. So having said that, before I just jump into the agreements that we received comments on, are there any questions at the outset? Okay, hearing none, let's go to the EDAM entity implementation agreement first. And so in this agreement, we received a comment here in recital A, just to make clear that the EIM entity not only had to execute the agreement, but also perform in accordance with the agreement. So thank you for that clarification change.
I'm not sure you're sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Thanks for catching that. Okay, hopefully that's better now.
Yep, got it.
Okay, great. Thank you for catching that. So recital A, as I was saying, we've added this language here just to memorialize that the EIM entity will perform in accordance with the terms of this agreement. And let's see, scroll down here. 2.1 we took out, but is not limited to, simply because that is incorporated within the definition of including in section 1 above. So that was redundant, so we removed that language. Scrolling down to 2.4, we just made some other clarifying edits here to reduce or to eliminate redundancy. And so we left that just as balancing authority area, as by definition, the EDAM entity is the BA for its BAA. So we've made that change. In section 3.2.1, this talks about when the CAISO may terminate the agreement. We've removed this subsection 2 below because that is addressed in 3.2.2 here, when which allows for the EDAM entity itself to terminate the agreement. And one of the comments that we received that applies to sort of all the agreements is it's about, if you scroll into 3.2.2 here, you'll notice that in this section, the EDAM entity, in order to terminate the agreement, they would have to give the CAISO no less than 30 days written notice. And the amount of time that an entity needs to give CAISO notice to terminate an agreement, it sort of varies across all these agreements. And I just want to sort of note that comment, and I'm going to come back to it at the end here, because what I want to do is I want to first discuss the different agreements that we've done and go through the comments, and then I'll address that concern at the very end, because I think it's a little bit easier to understand once you see the different agreements, the different roles and responsibilities, and the effects that the agreements have, and that helps, I think, explain why we have different time periods for different kinds of agreements. But for this agreement, because it's sort of like I was saying before, almost like a commercial software services type of agreement, we've left it at 30 days notice, and nobody had any issue with that. Scrolling down further, see if we had any other comments. We eliminated the language here in section 7.2 that talked about having an arrangement with the EDAM entity for the BAA. And since this agreement is with the EDAM entity, that language seemed redundant, so we eliminated that. That was decided it was not needed. And let's see if there's anything else here in the implementation agreement. I don't think there was. So that is the implementation agreement. And I'm going to pause for a minute here. Did anybody have any questions regarding the implementation agreement? Okay. Let me move on to the next agreement, which is the EDAM addendum to the EIM entity agreement. So this is what I was talking about earlier about how we had developed addendums to some of the existing EIM agreements. And as you'll see, these are very short agreements that have recitals. They incorporate Section 33 of the Tariff. Here, I believe it was 6 cities in Section 2 here caught that in the EIM entity agreement, we also referred to non-participating resources. So we also threw in a reference to that here in this section, and that under this agreement, non-participating resources will also be read as references to EDAM resources. And then we've also cleaned up a few of the references to some of the sections as well. So thank you, 6 cities, for catching those. And then in Section 3 here, this is what I was talking about before, where an entity may terminate the addendum, but still be able to participate as an EIM entity. So this is the section that discusses that. So that's what the addendum to the EIM entity agreement looks like. Are there any comments on this agreement? Okay.
Hey, John, this is
Yeah.
John. So I think let's do this. Let's pause, because I think you need to take care of something here for 10 or 15 minutes. We can take our break, I think, and then we can pick this up along with Appendix C or anything, Appendix F, any questions like that, if you're not quite back yet, and then we'll pick this up again after that. So does that make sense, Isabella? You want to go like to a 10-minute break or something like that, and then we'll pick right back up with those other materials and then catch John when he's back.
Yep, that sounds great. So let's meet back here, let's say 3:15.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Yep. You can hit stop share and then roll.
One.
All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. We are going to pick things up with Appendix C, C and F, and then we'll go back to B once John Spomer is back. So, John Anders, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Isabella. And we will go to Appendix C, even though we did not receive any specific comments on these changes. We do recognize, there were substantial changes, and I thought maybe a quick walkthrough might be helpful for stakeholders. If there was any questions, we could solve them now, and then we'll get back to there was very little in Appendix F, and then John should be back, and we'll wrap up with Appendix B when he gets back. So Appendix C is sort of the appendix where we have the formulation for the locational marginal prices, and as we discussed in many places in the EDAM tariff changes that we're proposing, there are sort of changes in the way the marginal cost of energy, from a system marginal energy cost, and the transfer revenue calculations, and all of that, the congestion and the greenhouse gas calculations. Those all precipitated the changes you see here. And once we were involved in considering changes to Appendix C, we went ahead and undertook some simplification. There was some provision for calculations that were previously included that we thought may benefit from just a simplification and clarification. So we've done that here in this draft, and I'll go through it, and I'll ask experts on my end for any questions. But the first thing we did was just to talk about the overall LMP, and it's both the day ahead and real-time market formulations for that, and how it includes all the formulations all the way from day ahead through the RTD, and it uses the same concept of a reference bus, and then we've explained a little bit more about the reference bus in context of the formulation here, and how that is utilized in the power flow modeling, et cetera. And then we've talked about, then we break down, of course, the separate components of the LMP, and that's where we get into the various changes to each of the following components. So at the highest level, the LMP is the marginal energy cost, the marginal congestion, the marginal cost losses, or the marginal cost of greenhouse gases. And these changes are, again, to reflect the marginal energy, marginal congestion, marginal loss, and greenhouse gas components, with the greenhouse gas being the new component. And then we had previously distinguished, and I was not involved in the original formulations, between the day-ahead formulation and the real-time formulation. I'm not sure what the distinction was or why there were differences. Did somebody say they couldn't see my screen? Can other people see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it. It looks like that attendee is having a technical issue, but we're working with them.
Okay, good. So that's now not used because it's captured. It's the same formulation for the day ahead and the real-time markets, the LMP formulation, that is. So then you get into the four components, and you have the marginal energy cost. And so here we talk about the representation of the marginal energy cost using transfer system resources. And of course, the biggest difference here is it's not a system-wide marginal energy cost where we previously had in the energy imbalance market, and then we would allocate the offsets on either side of the enterprise. Now each BAA has its own marginal energy cost, and then these transfer system resources are used to represent each BAA marginal energy cost on each side of the transfer locations. And so those will be associated with the transfers, and then the cost differences would result in the transfer revenues. But this is how the marginal energy cost is determined for each of the BAAs, including the CAISO BAA. And that's quite a bit different from the system level determinations that were the previous calculation. So that's a change. So then the second component, the congestion component, so we calculate that. It's not that dissimilar, but here we have simplified the formulation, and so it's all of that represented as follows. And so you can see here we've removed some of the details within the formulation and have kept it at this higher level here. So the different annotations to that formulation. This is to derive the congestion within each BAA, or the congestion components within each BAA. And then once you get through that, the rest of these components or notations were relevant to the prior derivation, and then there's quite a bit here that is no longer relevant to the new and sort of more clarified, simplified formulation of the congestion component. And then you get to the losses component. Similar changes represented at a fairly high level here. And wait, one of these was supposed to be, okay, I think it's okay. And using the marginal energy cost, losses, and with that formulation, quite a bit of changes to consider here and reflect the different power flow solutions. And again, with these market transfers at transfer locations between two BAAs, so the differences between those resources on either side, and how that can affect the marginal loss calculation, or how the marginal loss calculation is part of that calculation. And then finally, the greenhouse gas component, and a full description or explanation of that formulation here, which is new, and it's a change from the previous description, which had a unique greenhouse gas bid adder type structure calculation for EIM resources. Now it's done for all resources in the dam area. And then finally, some changes to the intertie scheduling price calculation. So this is again how the scheduling point, and this is the section that is affected by the aggregation of the P nodes outside the balancing area and the pricing of intertie schedules at different scheduling points. here's the, talk about the default gap, D-gap, how the aggregations occur, and the intertie locational prices. And then when you're in the energy imbalance market, the modeling between an EDAM BAA and an EIM BAA, and the use of the mirror system resources to get those intertie prices accurate. And then that's all the changes that we have in Appendix C. Yeah, a couple of minor changes, and the rest is relates to the integrated balancing authority areas, which, as we mentioned earlier, are not subject to those provisions in the EDM, so they would be priced according to these provisions up above and not according to the provisions below. Okay, Appendix C. I will open it up for any questions and comments, concerns on Appendix B. Sorry, C. Okay. And then before I turn it back to John to wrap it up, I was going to just mention the small change to Appendix F for rate schedule. And all this is to reflect that the EDAM administrative charge will be calculated similar to the grid management charge, except that a different systems operation charge will be used, and the real-time market percentages will determine the EDAM system operations charge, which will be part of the EDAM administrative charge. So that's a very small change to Appendix F, but otherwise this is all the way the ISO calculates its administrative charges. And for participants in the EIM, they would continue to receive the EIM administrative charge and not the EDM administrative charge, which will include all of these other things, most importantly, the different system operations charges to reflect the scope of the services in the extended day-ahead market. Okay, so I think, John, if you're ready, I can stop sharing and you can go back, and you have now a little bit more room to maneuver, so you can take it from here and walk us through the rest of the provisions and changes to Appendix B, which is the section of the tariff that includes our pro forma service agreement. John?
Thanks, John. Get that. Let me share my screen again, and we can pick up where I left off. I think we had previously discussed the implementation agreement and gone through the addendum to the EIM entity agreement. So let's move on to the addendum to the EIM participating resource agreement. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see it, John.
Okay, thanks. Not too many comments or edits to this agreement. We fixed the typo in recital C. If we go down to section 2 here, the last sentence that we deleted was redundant of this section, or this sentence right here. So we deleted the second mention of that sentence. And then in section 3, to comport with sort of this idea of EDAM resources versus EDAM resource facilities, we revised the term EDAM resource here to be EDAM resource facilities. It's more appropriate. And this provision just says that Schedule 1 of the agreement will be updated to include all EDAM resource facilities that are not already included as EIM resources. So hopefully that makes sense, and that should be consistent with how we've defined those terms. Any questions on the addendum to the participating resource agreement? Okay. Let me move on to our first sort of standalone agreement that I was talking about. This is the EDAM LSC agreement. And this contains a lot of sort of the common terms that are in our pro forma type agreements. What it does is in the recitals, it essentially defines what an EDAM LSC is. Here in section B, it's responsible for load within an EDAM entity BAA that's not represented by the EDAM entity and is authorized by the EDAM entity to represent the load in the day-ahead market and the real-time market. So if we scroll down here, we get to section 2.1. So one of the obligations of the EDAM LLC is to make sure it's got a scheduling coordinator. 2.2 discusses the information that the LSC needs to provide. There was a question about what I guess probably what specifically the information was. I've attempted to maybe reword the sentence a bit just to make clear that it's information regarding the load and it's information that's required to be provided pursuant to the tariffs and whatever applicable business practice manuals. I'm not sure how more specific I can get without sort of reciting maybe tariff provisions in here, but if there's any further question regarding this provision, please feel free to let me know, and I can attempt to answer that question as best I can. But I've tried to reword it a little bit to make it a bit clearer, and hopefully it is. Scrolling down to section 3.2.1 here, there was a reference to section 5.2 originally, and that should be a reference to section 10.2, which talks about how you give notice to the other party. So I've corrected that. I've also included a mechanism here in subsection 2 that allows the CAISO to terminate the LSC agreement should the EDAM entity for the BAA in which the LSC is located, if that EDAM entity terminates its participation in the extended day-ahead market, then obviously the LSC would not be able to participate in EDAM either. So CAISO would be able to terminate the LSC agreement should that occur. Going down to 3.2.2, just made a clarification of the language here. I believe it was 6 cities who made this recommendation. Appreciate it. That's been made. And then scrolling down to section 4.1 here, there's a question about what the word subject to means. This is language that we use, I think, across all of these pro forma agreements, that they are subject to section, 33, and in some cases 29. And I think it sort of, speaks for itself in the fact that, what we're meaning is that, the terms of those tariff provisions are incorporated into the agreement, as they are applicable. So if there are any additional questions or concerns about that language, feel free to let me know. Let's see, going down to section 7.2, this discusses the necessary approval for entering into the agreement. And we've added some language just to make sure that the LSC has any arrangements necessary with the applicable EDM entity for the BAA in which it's located before it, signs the agreement. So to the extent it needs to talk through any processes with the EDM entity or make any other arrangements, that it does that before it signs this agreement. So that's been noted. Slight clarification in 10.2. And then I think that is it for the LSC. Okay, one more comment regarding the LSC agreement. And this discusses, this is in respect to section 10.9, federal provisions. And there was a comment as to, what kind of, federal law provisions are we talking about here? This is meant for entities who execute this agreement who are federal entities and thereby need to incorporate certain provisions regarding federal law, into all their agreements. This essentially just says that, we agree to incorporate into the agreement those provisions that are provided by the LSC and that had been previously agreed to by CAISO. So we recognize that we've entered into, these types of agreements with the federal entity in the past, and we will incorporate those same federal provisions from those agreements into this agreement. Just trying to keep it simple and straightforward. But again, this would only apply to LSCs who are federal entities. So are there any questions about the LSC agreement? Okay. That brings us to the last agreement that I'm going to talk about, and this is the new agreement. This is another standalone agreement. It is the EDM Transmission Service Provider Agreement. What it does in the recitals, it states what the EDM TSP is. And then once we get down into the agreement itself, Section 2.1 says that the agreement is subject to Section 33. So the EDM TSP will be subject to the responsibilities that are laid out in Section 33, and probably most specifically those that are included in Section 33.4.2, I believe, which discusses the EDM TSP and what its responsibilities are. So those are incorporated into this agreement by way of Section 2.1. And then the rest of this agreement is pretty much, follows, our other agreements. It's got a term and termination provision in it, dispute resolution, reps and warranties, and all the miscellaneous provisions that you'll find. So I know you're all seeing this for the first time right now, but when we go ahead and publish the latest round of the tariff, you'll be able to see this agreement and provide any questions or comments that you have. So that's that agreement. And I guess, so the last thing that I want to just briefly hit on that I mentioned at the outset was sort of this concept of how the CAISO came about deciding on, how much, what the length of notice that a party would have to give in order to terminate an agreement. And while I'm on this TSP agreement, I'll just sort of, highlight this 3.2.2 here, where it says that, for this agreement, the TSP would have to give 180 days notice to terminate the agreement. That is also consistent with the number of days that an EDM entity would have to provide notice if it was going to terminate, and that's by virtue of the EIM entity agreement. And we're going to stick with the 180 days here because to the extent an EDM entity also is an EDM TSP and also entered into this agreement, to the extent that we can keep those notice periods similar, we'd like to do that. It's a longer period of time because for an EDAM entity, the time it will take us to sort of to disengage and sort of, unwind the EDAM activities from that entity and do any sort of, transition, efforts that are necessary, et cetera. It just takes time to do all those things. And so that's why it's a length of time here. And so we think it would be best at this point just to keep the TSP consistent with the EDAM entity agreement, keep it at 180 days. If you go through other agreements like I believe it's the participating resource agreement, it's 90 days. For the LLC agreement, it's also 90 days. Those are agreements that are easier to unwind, and we can understand it in that situation why the participating resource or LLC would want to move on in a little bit more of a quicker manner. And so that's why those have a shorter amount of period for giving notice. So, I understand it may not be perfect, but that's sort of our thinking on that. And if anybody has any other thoughts or concerns about that time period, feel free to let us know. We can take it back, we can consider it, and decide if any further changes are needed. So with saying that, let me open it up again for any questions, either on the TSP agreements or anything else that I said, and we can go from there. So does anybody have any questions?
Again, you can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen or by pressing #2.
Okay, if there are no questions, then I think I'm done with my presentation. I will stop sharing and hand it back over to John.
Thanks, John. Isabel, I think that takes us all the way through the materials that we had presented out to stakeholders in the initial draft. Again, I really appreciate everyone's engagement and participation. Not everyone's favorite task to go through all this material, but very worthwhile exercise for us and hopefully for you as well. As I mentioned earlier, but I'll reiterate a few things on sort of next steps, the timing and everything. We did discuss, and we're going to publish these working versions of the rest of the materials. So not all of them included changes. So if there's anything missing, like say Appendix C or something, it may not have any incremental changes from what was originally published. But we can get those working drafts out on our initiative webpage this week. We'll target, say, Wednesday or Thursday, something like that, but soon. So that'll be the first thing that we'll take care of and get those up and available for everyone's consideration and review. Then I wanted to remind folks we have committed to publishing a revised version of all the materials. So these would be cleaned up versions of the working drafts that you'll all already have seen. And we're going to do that. I think we've committed to that first week, June 5th, that sometime in that week. We will try to get it done sooner, but at this point, we can't commit to do that, but you will have these working versions in the meantime. So that should help. And from there, we're thinking about targeting a 2-week turnaround for your comments. So hopefully between the time we've spent in the workshops, the time you would have with the incremental working drafts, if you wanted to check on any edits or questions you had in the initial versions, and then the time we'll give you with the final updated language, that should be sufficient for everyone to get their comments back to us. And we'll need a little bit of time to reflect on all of that. And then we will, I believe, prior to filing, be publishing what we generally consider it the final draft, and that's subject to formatting and maybe a tweak here and there. It's pretty much the tariff languages would be filed. And we're still, I want to say, still targeting filing at the end of June. But again, as noted, these are tentative until confirmed through the daily notice and briefing process. So I know that's soon, and there's a lot of work to be done. We're well aware of all that, and we're working on and focusing on the tariff language at the moment to try to get that squared away, because if we can do that, that'll move us a long way down the road towards meeting these target dates. And I think it was Alva mentioned when we were talking about the DAME, and David Zotlo and other colleagues in the ISO are working on it. We'll be publishing a draft of the DAME tariff based on the board's approval of that, or governing body and board approval of that policy here shortly. So that should give everyone all of the materials associated with these two significant efforts to compare, contrast, reference, cross-reference, whatever you want to do in current timeline. So that's it. I will ask, are there any questions about the upcoming process, dates, timelines, or anything else just of general interest to stakeholders? All right, Isabella, well, that's all I have. So again, thank you all, and we really appreciate this. And next time on round 2, it won't be 12 hours of workshops, but we may have to set aside some time nonetheless. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John, and thanks to the rest of the ISO team for your time today. And thank you to all our stakeholders for tuning into these 3 workshops over these past couple weeks. That concludes today's workshop, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.